I've run down every conference in the Power Five how I would do it if they went with either what is being rumored, like the ACC is talking about putting together pods possibly, or just to go with a Big Ten configuration of 10 games. And if every conference did that, I'm putting together what I think should happen. So, Steve, we're going to start with you in regards to Big Ten scheduling, what you think the conference will do, what the priorities are going to be in scheduling, versus maybe what idea that you have in terms of what would be most effective in what's going to be a crazy, wild, different season.
Yeah, I wonder if they want to shoot for 10 conference games using the 9 that are already scheduled as a guideline, and then maybe picking up one more of those no plays from the Western Division in Ohio State's case, which I think is Wisconsin, Northwestern, Purdue, or Minnesota, I think are the 4 that they're not scheduled to play. And to get 5 home games and 5 away games, just very simply, Ohio State would pick up one of those opponents and play them on the road. And it could quite possibly be Wisconsin or Minnesota. I don't know what if they need a home game or an away game. I guess it's all got to match up like a jigsaw puzzle. I want to make sure I say that properly. That may be the easiest and simplest way to solve it, to get to 10. There was one sentiment that they may do this piecemeal and announce 4 or 5 games as kind of a trial balloon and see how that goes, maybe from mid-September until mid-October, space them out as best as they can. And then if that works out good, or what the statistics are showing and everything else, again, we are in completely uncharted territory with this whole thing. And you hear half-baked things coming up all the time, of how people are going to go about solving scheduling issues. And I think one of the tipping points to me was they canceled the Northwestern Wisconsin game at Wrigley Field, said it was postponed, which means to me that they're going to play again there sometime off in the future. But that game would revert back to a home site because they want complete control of the environment on their campus. So that's, I guess, maybe a tip that there wouldn't be a neutral site championship game if there even is a championship game this year, that maybe it would be played at a campus site if they play it. So it's totally up in the air right now, I guess, what direction all the scheduling is going to go.
Well, just going off what Steve said, when we talked to Gene Smith, he said they would probably use the current schedule as a guideline, and then he'd like to add one more. But you've seen some ADs want to load the division games at the start of the schedule. So Nebraska AD Bill Moose wanted the division games at the middle of the schedule. He also wanted 12 conference games, which seems like a lot if you also want to build in the bye weeks, because if you're talking, if they were to start week 0, which Gene said they could, you could have a bye week after every 2 games all the way through the season if you play a 10-game schedule. But I don't know. What's better, to schedule the division games at the start when things are ideal, if there's such a thing right now? Like, you're eventually going to play game 1, so play the division games as quickly as possible. Where I guess Bill Moose is thinking, if things happen early on, you still have those games in the middle. This season is going to be so flexible, malleable, however you want to call it. But I guess you have to. Ohio State has to play Michigan this year, and you can't wait until November 20 whatever to think that that's going to happen, or to rely on that happening. So I guess you got to play the division games as quickly as possible, which means Ohio State, Michigan in Ohio Stadium in front of 0 to 20,000 fans in 84-degree weather on September 20 whatever.
I mean, do we even have to really play divisions this year? I mean, it's such an odd year. I mean, I understand wanting to carry over the 9-game schedule that you have mean, obviously, all those dates are going to get blown up. The order is going to get blown up because they're divisional games on the slate from week 1 all the way through the end. So you're not necessarily going to be able to stay in that order or not on those dates for certain, and probably not in the order of the games, just the way everything is. But is this a year that you just say to heck with divisions and you just play it, and then your top 2 teams at the end, if if we're able to have a championship game, those are the teams that go to Indianapolis. But yeah, I agree with everything that's been said and that we've heard, where we probably will only get a section of the calendar released, and then we'll see what happens. And Gene Smith also kind of talked about, just because a game on the schedule is slated to be in Columbus or Madison or Piscataway, if that area is too hot, it's just going to get flipped. And if we're talking about less than 20,000 fans or whatever, in worst case scenario, 0 fans, it's not going to be a lot of logistical nightmare at that point moving that around. One of the biggest things I took off that call with Gene was just about maybe a bit of a competitive imbalance as to how the schedule is going to be, just because of the uncertainty of the situation. And, I think that does lend itself a little bit toward there being an East and a West. In the East, the power still lies in the East in the Big Ten. So, I mean, if you're going to get those 6 teams that you're going to play and then 4 from the other side, and you manage to avoid Wisconsin and I don't even know Iowa. I mean, I don't even know who the second best team in the West is going to be at this point. I mean, it's going to be a lot different than a team maybe coming out of the West who gets to play against a much easier slate over there, and then that might somehow miss Ohio State and Penn State. So, and I don't know if we have any answers, but I'm not completely buying into the fact that we will have divisions this year, just based on the fluidity of the situation. And I think that if they take divisions off the table, it's a little bit easier to determine a champion in a lot of ways of just looking at overalls and certain things like that.
Yeah, I like the idea of no divisions. I go back to Gene Smith said we can't get hung up on fairness of schedule and equality. Bill Moose said we have to make sure that we have fairness and equality in the scheduling. So there's still all kinds of disconnects between the ADs that they've had to work out this week. But I think no divisions makes the most sense. But as we said before we started, I think, there's a difference between what we think they'll do and what we would do. And I think maybe that's one of them.
We talked last week about the travel being less of a factor, and the factor of the Big Ten consolidating and canceling the non-conference games and keeping everything under control was just that they wanted to keep everything under control within their guidelines. Therefore, I'm not completely understanding why the schedule needs to be torn up from an opponent standpoint, maybe from a scheduling on the calendar, the dates, but in regards to who everyone is playing, why the 9 games can't stay intact to a certain extent. I know once you start moving teams around in dates, then you may run into some difficulties there. I guess that's what that is. But otherwise, I would stay with the 9 games and then add that kind of featured game, Ohio State, Michigan, home and match up the rivals and go from there. You can start with the Old Oak and Bucket game, Indiana, Purdue, do a cross-division rivalry, a home series, and then you match up the other 6 teams in the division, if at all possible. So you don't think there's any possibility that they risk Ohio State, Michigan within maybe like a 3-week pocket to try to hit it in the last few weeks of November and keep it there?
I think anything is possible this season. I think everything has to be possible this season is what we're learning from the ADs. But there's just so much focus being spent on the division games up front that lends me to believe that there will be divisions and that I guess we'll see them up front. I don't know that that's the most important thing or I didn't view it as this thing that must happen, but everybody else has. So I'll go ahead and get on board.
I'm good with that. I think if each school's protected rival, as long as you protect that one game, I don't think it's important that Ohio State necessarily still plays Indiana, Rutgers, Maryland, Michigan State. But, if they're able to play Michigan and Penn State, those are the two biggies that everyone cares about.
Steve, if Ohio State doesn't play Rutgers this year and they win the Big Ten, it's a tainted title.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to put a star by it, but Tony, I think we're putting a star by this one regardless because and at the bottom of the list, it's going to say bleeped up year. So yeah.
I don't care that the Dodgers in '81 won a World Series in that split season. It's still a World Series championship. So, time heals all wounds.
Do you know the Reds for a long time flew a banner that they had the best record in baseball in 1981. They didn't win the division in either the first half or the second half. They had the best record in baseball and didn't get to go to the playoffs.
And if I remember correctly, one of those, I'm sorry, we're going to continue the baseball talk for just a second here. If I remember correctly, in one of those halves, they were only a half game out of first place. Now, you talk about getting ripped off. You just didn't play enough games to tie for first place. But yeah, the Cincinnati Reds infamously, with the best record in baseball, couldn't make the playoffs. What a screwed up season that was.
I'm going to throw in today's edition of Ohio State Buckeyes Live is sponsored by Wendy's. I had a great grilled chicken sandwich for lunch today.
The bell.
That's probably going to push us over the top, Steve. Oh,
we hit the triumvirate.
Yes, they're competing, and they're also competing in how much money they're sending our way as well. It's a dead heat at this point.